Thank you especially to the team, the ADC team. This conference is amazing, and I'm learning a lot about the right way to run a conference, so thank you so much for having me. And so today's talk is about burning questions and why they're important. It's about the Kepler Concordia project, which I'm going to tell you all about, and I'll explain how I'm working on building a world in which music is science and where both are used to understand ourselves and our worlds. And for years, this has been my opening slide. It's to represent the human pursuit of truth and the art of the question, not to mention excellent mustaches. But 2020, right? This is now my opening slide representing just how magnified my awareness has become on how much of an enormous privilege it is for me to be here today, to talk like this, to be free to think about truth and beauty and music and science and technology in a world that doesn't really afford these privileges to everyone. And to be alive during this time of extreme crisis, where humanity's experiencing all of this unequally, so dreadfully unequally. And 2020 has made me think really long and hard about the literally burning questions of social justice, what it means to be good, how we can save our planet, how to help, how to do no harm. These are really the burning questions on my mind. But, and I guess even though we're separated physically and we're connected through technology like we never have been before, I guess because of being connected like this, we feel each other's pain. We feel each other's suffering. Some of us extremely acutely, if you're hyper empathic like myself, and we feel each other's crises and victories, and it's all very overwhelming. And we're living the consequences of failing again and again to behave as one family. My work is motivated by the conviction that all barriers to human progress really revolve around our failure to recognize our essential oneness and to live in harmony with each other on the planet. We've just really failed to figure this out yet. And 2020 has been a year of intense learning. But I still think that music and science are part of the solution. So with 2020 in mind, I'm really moved to share a few lines from a letter that Johannes Kepler wrote in 1621 to a friend. And he was talking about Cicero during the fall of the Roman Empire. And he said, when, after the fall of the Republic, he could hardly find any consolation in his grief, when everything was lost and no hope existed of regaining the loss, and he realized that no opportunity was left for his former activity, he devoted all his energy to philosophy, and also encouraged his friend to take up these things as they divert the hearts from grief and lighten the sorrows. If God fulfills these wishes, my mathematics will always be ready to offer delight and give relief from sorrow. So it's really in looking at what we have in front of us and thinking about it in this way. This talk is really a love letter from Johannes Kepler to us, or from me to you. It's really about finding ways to access the delight in mathematics and providing relief from sorrow. But first, I put that there just to let you know that if you want to hear those words in a song, you can go to that link that was on the previous site and have a listen to our band, the Imperial Mathematicians, singing the words of Kepler. But first I'm going to tell you about yak shaving. And if there's anyone that knows about yak shaving, it's people in this audience. But just for those of you who aren't computer scientists, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and maybe it'll change your life the way that it has changed mine. So what is yak shaving? So let's say you have a thing, and that is a thing that you really want to do. It's a very important task. And then you realize that in order to do that thing, you have to do another thing, some other thing, and you have to finish that other thing. So before you can do the main thing, and then you realize you start doing the other thing, and you realize, oh no, I have to do this other thing. And that third thing may or may not be related to the second thing or the main thing, but you got to finish that. And in order to do that, you may have two other things that you have to do first. And then you see where I'm going with this. By the time you're at the end of this chain of things that you have to do that are in the critical path of the main thing, you are shaving a yak. So actually, yaks are very important. They're very friendly sometimes. Sometimes they're very uncooperative, but they're actually very, very important in being able to do this thing. And I find this concept very liberating when I think about it in the context of my own life's purpose and how to figure that out. So when I was a little girl growing up in a family of musicians, I was pretty convinced that music was my thing. I think I was just taking it for granted. But we actually had it pretty rough, my family growing up. And music actually kind of didn't cut it in terms of making it possible to I guess, thrive in life. And so I was so scared to do music as a thing when it came to choosing it for choosing what I wanted to do at university. And naturally, I avoided it at all costs and did something very, what it felt like much easier than music. Even though I knew that my life's purpose had something to do with music, instead, I went into aerospace engineering, as you do. And I was so afraid of music, in fact, that I went all the way to a PhD and started working at NASA as a research scientist, which I did for 19 years. And I guess I kind of did this to avoid what I thought was my life's destiny. It didn't work out that way, because pretty soon after I started working at NASA, I decided that I wanted to learn how to produce music. So I bought a recording studio. I started making records, learning music technology on my own on the side. And pretty soon I was doing both things in parallel, kind of two jobs simultaneously. And then something really magical happened. I was invited by the Association for Baha'i Studies in Japan to give a speaking tour in Japan, all around Japan. And they wanted me to talk about the mystery of space and human nature. And so, they asked, what impact has space science and astronomy had on our collective understanding of ourselves as human beings? Now, this topic was very, very intimidating for me. It forced me to zoom out and look at the largest possible picture of what I was doing with my life. And it was in preparing for this talk that I kind of discovered or rediscovered the work of Johannes Kepler. As an engineering student, I was familiar with Kepler. I thought of him as a scientist. I thought of him as a mathematician. And I knew about his 3 laws of planetary motion, of course, because I'd taken them in my astrophysics class. And I hadn't really thought about how his worldview shaped how he made this discovery. And most of all, what I hadn't realized up until that point was that Kepler used music to make these discoveries. And he thought of music in a different way than we think about music now. And so I started, this was the beginning of me just like my mind being blown. Why don't we use music like this right now? Why don't we use music to investigate reality? And how would we use music how did he use music to investigate reality? And when I went to try and figure that out, try and read his works, it wasn't really very easy to penetrate it in this way. But I tried and I tried and I keep trying, kind of low-key on the down low as I was doing these other things. I was a little embarrassed that I was so intrigued by this concept, but I just kind of kept at it. And as I started to look into it, I realized that Kepler's way of thinking about music in this way wasn't that unusual in his. The worldview then was that music was one of the tools in the quadrivium, together with arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, for investigating reality. It was one of the sciences. It wasn't art. It wasn't self-expression. It wasn't a way to communicate emotions. It wasn't any of these things. In fact, it was number in time. Arithmetic is number, geometry is number in space, music is number in time, astronomy is number in space and time. And I was like, wow, I would love to hear this, to feel what it would feel like, to really understand through musical principles the reality. And of course, in that time, religion was very prevalent, and this kind of worldview was shaped by the thinking that God was the divine geometer, and if you could understand astronomy, and you could understand music, and you could understand arithmetic, then you could, and geometry, of course, you could understand God. And this was the worldview of Kepler at the time. The same person, Boethius, who shaped that thinking, also shaped medieval Christian doctrine. And at the time, there were three kinds of music in Christian doctrine. There was musica mundana, which is this idea of the music of the spheres, that all of reality is created from and shaped by harmonic principles. That was not audible. Musica humana, the music of the human spirit, the music of the body, the music of the human condition, all things human and musical. And then the third, that also was not thought to be audible. And then music, I am not going to attempt to pronounce this Latin, but essentially instrumental music, which is singing in instruments. And this was the only one of the three that was thought to be audible. And it existed solely to be able to make audible those first two. So this was a completely different way of thinking about music than what we have today. And so started, and this was 2001 that I started running across this. And so this started a very long, slow burn to trying to understand and figure out how to take up the work of figuring out the archetype of the fabric of the world, the way Kepler believed that the archetype of the fabric of the world is kept hidden in these celestial music, in the celestial music, the music of the spheres. He really thought that was the key to understanding everything. And he thought it revolved around our ability as humans to perceive harmony, because he thought harmony was the organizing principle of everything. I'm not going to read this quote right now. It's super deep, and I encourage you to come back and read it. I'm glad this is being recorded. But the main gist of it was that we're essentially built to perceive harmonies. Our brains and our spirits are built to perceive that, and our mind will seize upon harmony and patterns, especially if they're presented to multiple senses at once. And so this started me thinking, okay, how can I build an instrument that would allow us to perceive the harmonies that are intrinsic in nature as music? Because then our brains could then immediately decode it and make sense of it. And then Kepler laid out a challenge that I took very personally, and I still take very personally. And this essentially drives all my work. He said, follow after ye modern musicians, and judge this according to your arts, which were unknown to antiquity. And so I just started really, really low key, but super deeply obsessing over what would it look like if Kepler had access to today's data, to today's tools, to today's DSP, to today's audio programming, to today's visualization, to today's VR. What would it look like to take everything about, especially the solar system, since that's his that was his thing, and to make that playable and explorable. And so this was the start, 2001, of me realizing, okay, I'm onto something here. That this might be my thing. And that was being reinforced by a resonance I felt even in my own religious tradition when I would read prayers that would say things like this: help me to acquire knowledge in the sciences and arts and to unravel the secrets that are treasured up in the inmost reality of all created beings. Make them to hear the hidden truths that are written and embedded in the heart of all that is. Just this idea that we could hear truth. That's just, I was like, okay, there it is. There's my thing. But what does that look like? What does that feel like? What if I could take the solar system and instead of presenting it like this, what if I could put a kid inside a solar system that was to scale, that was moving to scale, that was sonified and visualized, and they could fly through it and learn about science? Wow. So then I thought, oh my God, I have no idea how I would do this. This is just way beyond me, super overwhelming. Add to that the fact that NASA, meanwhile, at NASA, in this world of data visualization, the traditional solution to figuring out what to do with more and more data was just make more and more screens, make them bigger and make more of them and put all different parts of the data in front of people so they can absorb it all and make discoveries. And for me, I found this to be very limiting because I was at a certain point where my visual field would be saturated and there's just no more information I could put into my brain visually. And I was convinced, and I still am convinced, that if we were to take some of that and convert it into sound, or especially into music that could then be decomposed by the brain back into information, then we would actually have additional channels of processing available to us as scientists. And so I started trying to figure out how to pursue this. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to need to convince NASA that they need to let me, make it possible for me to learn the tools. Because all I knew at the time was Fortran 77. I mean, you saw a picture of me. I was born I grew up in the 70s. So Fortran 77 was not going to cut it to make an experienceable sonified solar system. And so when they were, there was a program called the Innovation Ambassadors Program. And I was applying to go to the Media Lab. And they asked me to say everything I'd done in my career so far, and then how what I wanted to do would fit into NASA's strategic plan. And oh my goodness, this was another big breakthrough for me because I finally plotted everything, not just the things I thought NASA would think about, but all the things I thought that I cared about in one plot, and just said to them, goal, that is my goal, right at them in the middle where art and ideas and philosophy and experiments and science and technology all overlap. That's where I want to be. So they let me go to the Media Lab, which was really great. And that was, of course, a life-changing place for me. And while I was there, I started interacting with the international community on auditory display. And I started to meet people who are today some of my closest friends and collaborators. And one of the first people I met at ICAD, the International Community on Auditory Display, was Joachim Gassmann, a German friend of mine who had, at that conference, was presenting just a very simple idea. He'd taken the Mandelbrot set, which many of you are probably familiar with, especially visually, and he took this equation and he sonified it and visualized it and made it interactive. And what was so exciting about this this piece of work was just with a pretty simple mapping of path length to sine wave frequency and the superposition of these sine waves. This essentially transformed my understanding of the mathematics. And up until this point, I thought I understood fractals. I thought I understood self-similarity. I thought I understood this mathematics, but being able to explore it in this way was so exciting to me. It was so mind-blowing. Like, this is actually a musical instrument. You could take sounds from this and create a whole, and I've assigned this to my students since, but make whole pieces of music around all the different sounds that come from just this one mathematical equation. And I thought, oh, this is exactly what I want to do, but I want to do it for all the entire solar system. And so luckily at the next ICAD, I met Tarek Berry, and he had created a 3D audiovisual composition environment that looked an awful lot like what I was dreaming up. He had created a way of composing in three-dimensional space so that you could then play that composition as you flew through your objects. So these objects would each emit their own sounds. They could move around each other. They could pulse. They could have rhythms. It is an incredible piece of software. I'm showing what it looked like in 2009. It looks so incredible now. But even this early version for me still gets me really excited about the idea of just having everything in this 3D audiovisual composition environment created with data. So as you would be flying through it, this is a composition by Tarek that you're seeing, but instead you could be flying through information and hearing the information and seeing the information and really feeling like you're immersed in it and explore what's going on in the universe by essentially playing it. And oh my goodness, this was the start of a beautiful friendship. Tarek gave me his code, which was at the time so many different pieces of code talking to each other with OSC, and it is still a beautiful piece of work that I'm still trying to understand how to make data visualization out of, rather than just the beautiful artwork that he makes. So Tarek is a huge influence on me, on my thinking about what's possible, what a musical instrument is. And he even took it a step further, putting it into museums. He took it around in museums so that kids could play and interact with his 3D composition environment using the Reactable. And this is a huge step forward in my thinking about Concordia. And then while at the Media Lab, I met Imogen Heap. I heard she was looking for someone to help her in her studio, and I also heard she was looking for a new way to interact with her music, and so I invited her to visit. I was nearing the end of my time there, and I took her around and showed her Tarek's stuff and the stuff that I was working on, but I also introduced her to some other people that were doing some really cool things there. And she came into contact with my friend Ellie Jessup and a glove that she had made. Ellie had created a simple glove where she could sing a note and she could catch that note with her hand, and then she could manipulate it. And I think she had some sensors in her inside of her elbow. And so this technology really inspired Imogen. Ellie's glove had put an idea in her mind of interacting with her music and visuals on stage and in the studio in a way that liberated her from her technology, liberated her from the computer. And she and Tom started working. I joined about 6 months later, and we slowly but surely started developing our own system to support Imogen's dreams. And this is an early example of it. And what we learned when Imogen started going out with this system was that she wasn't the only one that wanted to interact with her computer in this way. And so Mimiu was born. If for those of you who haven't heard about the Mimiu gloves, I'll tell you a little bit about them. But if you want to learn more, you can go to mimiugloves.com. So this is a very short collage of some of the early examples of people using the gloves. This is Imogen controlling effects and looping, augmenting her piano performance. Ariana Grande, of course, went on tour with them in 2015, manipulating her voice. And this is one of our dancers in a hotel room on the tour when we were just playing around, and he was experimenting for the first time with the gloves, just responding to them with his body. And then we put them on his feet, because he's also a drummer. Daniel Mulhern, a film composer in London, uses the gloves in his composition process as augmentation of his existing instruments. Of course, Chris Halpam, a guitar player with cerebral palsy, who has pretty much completely switched over to using the gloves in his music performances. And then Chagall, I really apologize to Chagall for this very old video. I encourage you to look into her work. Chagall uses the gloves and now a bodysuit, and in some cases some VR technologies, to control pretty much everything on the stage, from the lights to the visuals to the music and her vocal effects, all with very beautiful choreographed dance gestures. And so these technologies enable a breaking down of barriers and the ability to inhabit the creations that you're making, really to be inside it and to interact with music and visuals and robots or whatever you desire, just with your gesture. And so please do look into Chagall's work and Imogen's work with the gloves. They're really masterful with them. And I'll just tell you a little teeny bit now about how the gloves work, and a little bit about where we are with this technology. So yeah, like I said, flex sensors in the fingers, IMU in the wrist. It measures orientation, movements, accelerations in the wrist. Communication via Wi-Fi, wireless. We have a combined button and LED in the finger. Sometimes you don't want big gestures. You just want to push a button. You want visual feedback, so the LED provides that. They're really designed for use on the stage. The breathable palm and open fingertips for playing instruments, for programming, for using touchscreens. There's accessible batteries for changing, for example, changing between sound check and the show, and haptic motor feedback for additional feedback. And one thing that I can share with you today is the first time we're sharing this publicly, and I'm really, really excited about this, is that we are about to release our Glover software as a standalone piece of software that you don't have to have the gloves to have. We'll be releasing in very early 2021. This is a dedicated software for composing and performing music using movement, and it can connect to any third-party music or visual or robotic software. So it allows you to map your gestures, whether with the gloves or with any other movement-based controllers like iPhone, like Leap Motion, Microbit, any phone. A really special feature of the software is that there's a generic OSC device that you can add, and you can design your own OSC device. So you can really listen to anything that sends OSC, and then you can map that using Glover's special logic to MIDI and OSC messages. So this gesture recognition has built into it machine learning, and you can really just design your own language, essentially make your body a musical instrument by creating your own unique mappings. It's a lot of fun, and it's a heck of a lot cheaper than the gloves. So you can find out more at mimigloves.com/clever. You can sign up to be on the mailing list to get informed when the release happens. It's going to be soon. And another really, really exciting thing is that we're developing a DIY version of the gloves that will allow you to make your own gloves, and then hook those into Clever. So that's my primary job this year. So that has been a lot of my 2020 in developing that. So this is super exciting. And I encourage you, if you haven't seen Imogen's keynote from last year, to just go check out what she does with the gloves. It's better than any video I could show. And online on YouTube also, you can find lots of videos that people have made that are super cool. So back to the Concordia story, sorry. So one thing that happened when I moved to England and started working with Imogen on these gloves is her mother gave her this book. And this is another just huge turning point in my life. This person is now another collaborator of mine. But what Hartmut Warm did in this book, Signature of the Celestial Spheres, is he took Kepler's work, all that book that I had spent decades trying to read and understand, he digested it, and then he made it explorable in visual form in an app that you could download onto your computer. And he really made understandable what Kepler was on about. And so for the first time, I felt like I could finally wrap my mind around, what is this data that I want to put into Tarek's system? How is it that I want to play the solar system? How do I get that data in there? And what's interesting about it? And this book, it's just gold. If you look at Venus and Earth as they go around the sun, in this case, drawing a line between them every so often, you get this amazing, beautiful geometric shape. And if you can imagine taking that two-dimensional shape and putting it into 3 dimensions, making it explorable, making it sonified, and making it immersive, and giving the person agency in exploring this data in this way, then what happens is it becomes a kind of a cross between a musical instrument and a video game. An immersive VR video game, kind of like Elite Dangerous, but where everything is true, everything you're hearing, everything you're seeing, everything you're feeling, everything you're interacting with is actually information, not just entertainment. And then, or maybe it's like, well, what does it feel like to play this? Maybe you're in a cockpit, like a space cockpit, or maybe you're in like a 1960s control room, or maybe you're in a modular synthesizer. And then I was like, oh, modular synthesizer. What if there were modules here where anybody could create a mapping between the data and the visuals and the audio, and you could go into this world where there were all these different modules that people had created, just like Eurorack or just like a modular synthesizer. And what if that platform, what if it was a platform of musical instruments, not just one musical instrument, take you there? I know, me too, right? It's like, oh, I want to build this giant interface that's like this, or this is my dream, to build like a Soviet nuclear control room, only instead of a ceiling there's a dome and there's all this data, and you're just like, in heaven. So that's my own geeky dream. But what if those cockpits could be designed by anyone who's playing it, and then like people could design a controller for a certain module and then upload that to Concordia, and then other people could download and build their own version of it as a DIY hardware cockpit interface. So then there became this whole hardware side of the idea, and it's just started kind of getting out of control. And after touring with Ariana, I came back to the UK and I started working at the UK, and I built this fab lab so I could start just experimenting with that, both the immersive visuals and audio that's in the back of the lab there, and then just this hardware lab where you could just start building things and trying stuff out. So you guys are funny. This chat is popping up on my phone. So I decided that I was gonna. This is where I just took another leap forward in my own confidence and just my own decision that this is really what I want to do with my life. I want to build this thing, whatever it is. First, I need to figure out what it is, but then I want to build it, and I want everyone to come, and I want them to play. And I don't want it to be a business per se. I just want it to be the coolest thing ever. So I launched in honor of Concordia and in honor of Kepler's 400th anniversary of Harmonies of the World. I launched this project at the University of Brighton, and then started really thinking hard about what it looks like. Who would play it? How do you play it? Why would you play it? And then broke it down to roughly 3 categories of participants in Concordia. The first clearly is the contributors, the people, the scientists who put data into it, the programmers who figure out how to map that to sound and visualization, new designers for designing new interfaces for interacting with this, composers that write music, write songs or pieces, whatever you call it, pieces of music in this thing, makers who make the hardware, remixers who download and remix and re-upload content. Obviously, this is all open source. Live performers, and then you have players, just people who they don't care about making stuff. They just want to play around in there. They want to make music. They want to use it as a teacher to teach students about astronomical concepts. They are at a museum. They just want to feel what it feels like to play the universe as a musical instrument. And then there's people that don't even want to go there. They just want to observe. And these people are actually active participants in Concordia as well. They're just maybe music lovers, or just people who want to watch somebody else discover something cool. And so then I started thinking about this as a whole ecosystem, a whole economy, like a world inside of this world where you earn value by contributing, where you expend value by playing. And so this really turned it a game. It actually turned it more into like Second Life or Decentraland or something. And then it's just now gotten to the point where it's completely overwhelming how many different fields of human endeavor are adjacent to this idea. And so, Anna, just for you, your talk was so brilliant. And anybody who didn't catch Anna's keynote, please go watch it. It was so good. And it just gave me this way of thinking about what I've been doing that's super helpful. So you plotted this, you were talking about where the prototype sits versus the minimum viable product versus the final product, and looking that on these axes of quality and time investment. And what I realized about Concordia is that there's this third dimension to this graph and to this innovation. And there's all of these prototypes that are down in the, I don't know if you can see my cursor. No, you can't. Down in that way lower left quadrant, if you think of the z-axis as the level of system integration, there's 2 directions that you can go from the middle. You could take one specific component and break it out into all the individual components and make prototypes of those. Or you can go in the other direction of integration of all these different things into a sort of a vision of what the final product might include and make a prototype of that. They're both going to be pretty crappy at first, and they're going to be down in that lower left-hand quadrant. But then if you have an idea that's like the sun, that's like the vision of where you want to be, and what you're like planting little seeds in that lower left-hand quadrant, and you're like growing. Sorry, I'm not a graphic designer, so this was just this morning that I put this up here because I've just been thinking about it nonstop since yesterday. But you have all of these different kinds of plants. You're planting them. Hopefully they're kind of growing up and towards the sun. You're raining down money and love, hopefully money, but definitely love. And these things are like growing, and then they get to a certain point of evolution, and you might think, oh, I could graft this thing with this other thing, and then it goes farther along the dimension of integration. Anyway, this really took me places last night thinking about it. And so it gave me it really liberated me from feeling so bad that I've left all of these pieces of the Concordia development in that nascent state of just having planted seeds and letting them grow and shining the sun and raining the rain, but not like really trying to force it into the world before all the things have grown enough. But in the meantime, we've been doing a lot of talking and a lot of hacking at various hackathons and a lot of little prototypes. We were invited to create some pieces at CubeFest last year at Virginia Tech. And this was a space with 139 speakers in this giant space. And we had lasers, and we took some data, very simple data. And in my case, I was looking at Jupiter and Uranus. This is Jupiter and Uranus, by the way. And then thinking about the circle of fifths and Coltrane's circle and the Fibonacci sequence and how all that stuff what has to do with the geometry. And then wrote a little piece and performed it in real time in my little, like I just did this in a couple of hours, but just experimenting around with what it's like to map this data into sound, and where all the sound is not just chosen for what it sounds like, but just generated from the mathematics. And Joachim created that little piece with me, but then I did something really, really brave, which was to create a Concordia launch pad. So my thinking was, and if you look back at that plot, that if we hear this thing, I realized that what I really needed is just to spend some time planting seeds and watering them and seeing what happens. And so I raised a little bit of money, a tiny bit of seed funding, and I decided I was going to gather some people here in Portland at It's Not Rocket Science Studios to create just some early prototypes of different aspects of Concordia. And they could be really in any area. I invited storytellers, artists, programmers, just lots of different types of performers, lots of different types of people. And then the idea was that we would work on these prototypes, and then we would have a show at the end of the 3 months and just share the fruits, and then discuss the broader scope of Concordia. And then even beyond that, think about, well, what would it look like to have an institute for the investigative arts? And so we spent 3 months together. We thought about burning questions. We didn't answer them. The answer to all of these questions is still, we don't know. But we learned a lot from asking them and trying to answer them. And so this is my studio here that I'm talking to you from. We just really spent a lot of time thinking about all the different things that are related, what we might want to study when thinking about this, what we're going to think about, what are the different things that relate. And then there was the meta planning for the show that we might want to have at the end of it. And I'm just going to go through these just really quick so you can get a feel for what it was like. We had daily things, we had weekly things, we had lots of sticky notes, we thought about topics, we made to-do lists, we explored the town. Portland is beautiful, by the way, and this is we went to see Tom York and Tarek in concert. They came during Concordia Launchpad, and we thought about stuff. But most of all, we created, and we experimented, and we got together in small groups, larger groups, shared with each other what we knew. We experimented with spatial audio and new interfaces. And then we got together at the end and shared what we'd come up with the public. And then people just created on their own. I found this after when I was cleaning up. Sam wrote a whole comic strip about Concordia. It's really funny and really crazy. And at the same time, we wrote a peer-reviewed article about this. So if you'd like to read this journal article from the Journal of New Music Research, you can get in touch with me and I can try and get you a copy. And now, basically, I'm just in a holding pattern. I'm waiting. I was accepted in cohort 6 of the New Zealand Edmund Hillary Fellowship to go to New Zealand and really start building this in earnest. I'm super excited, but because COVID locked out of New Zealand, and so I'm really just waiting to go and get started. And I have a chunk of money coming, a small bit of seed money in 2021 start working on this in earnest. But so for now, I'm just trying to shine the sun on the ideas and hope they are growing. I am doing a little bit of watering here and there, but it's mainly just waiting for 2020 to give me the permission to start. I keep starting. That's the thing. It's really funny because this project is just continuously starting. And actually, I think that's one of the things I love most about it. So I just want to end by going back to Kepler and his words. If you read his book, The Harmonies of the World, I really recommend it, but good luck. But at the end, he ends his scientific tome with a prayer, and his prayer is so simple, really. He says, "Holy Father, keep us safe in the concord of our love for one another, that we may be one, just as through the sweetest bonds of harmonies thou hast made all thy works one, and that from the bringing of thy people into concord, the body of thy church may be built up in the earth, as thou didst direct the heavens themselves out of harmonies." So that's Concordia. And if you want to know more, please get in touch. I know there's lots of you that fall into those thousands of categories that I flashed up on the screen. If you just want to see this project happen and you want to support it, you can support it on Patreon. So, I don't know if we have time for questions.
We have a question from Mark Mossberg, who asks, what advice would you give to those who are early on in their development and have vague and not well-formed creative visions?
Yeah, just think about that yak shaving. It's so cool. It will really help you. Just even if you only have a really vague idea of what it feels like when you come into contact with something related to your thing, pay attention to that and don't write it off. For so many years when I was at NASA, I was kind of embarrassed that I was like, because, solar system, been there, done that. It's not exactly groundbreaking science, really, at least not in the way that I was thinking about it. And so just don't dismiss that thing that resonates, because that's the thing that I point here. I don't know where it is. I actually feel it here. I can actually feel it. The hair raises on my arms or in some part of my body when I come into contact with something that I need to pay attention to. So really just pay attention and then learn to figure out, okay, is this a thing that can or will be in the critical path of that other thing? Or is this something that's going to take me away from that? And sometimes it means saying no to things that are shiny and exciting or lucrative, and saying yes to poverty and debt and struggle. And the struggle is worth it, though. Don't worry about that. If it feels like, oh, how can I live? I think I'm not going to say just follow your dreams and everything will work out, because that's really not true. But I say just pay attention and figure out how to occupy with yourself with things that will be important yaks for that other thing.
Thank you very much for that. Nolan asks, how do you avoid getting lost in creative visions only for nothing or little to manifest?
How do I avoid that? I don't avoid that.
Yeah.
I mean,
are you saying that's the challenge?
It's a challenge, but actually, I think it's sometimes useful just to embrace it. I mean, I think feeling that pressure that you put on yourself to feel like you have to have something to show can be really destructive. If I had let that dominate my thinking about Concordia, it wouldn't have evolved in the way that it's evolved, and it probably wouldn't have come into the world, because I would have had this premature need to pull it up into that top right quadrant of Anna's, like unnaturally, and then it would have just been crappy, you know? So I think don't worry if you get stuck in a creative, like you feel like this isn't really important, it's not going anywhere. Yeah. Sometimes it's only in hindsight that like I never would have thought that a degree in aerospace engineering would be in the direct path of my thing. It seemed so opposite from where I felt like I really should be going if I were going to focus on my thing. So I think there's an art to grafting the plants together.
Absolutely. Rhonda asks, is there any advice on finding people to share your projects and vision with? What do you do when you reach a skill gap?
Yeah, I think it's funny that you are asking me for advice, because I feel like I'm still at the beginning of this journey myself. I feel like I'm just still learning. I think you being here is exactly what I would do. Really, how Concordia evolved was just going to a lot of different conferences. The moment I found the courage to speak into the world, even though it was malformed and I really couldn't speak it, just to speak the invitation to help me figure out what this is. The moment I found the courage to do that, and I remember specifically when it was in Berlin, and Peter Kern had invited me to talk to a group at a hackathon or at CTM, and I was so scared and I was so nervous. I would just say that's the thing you have to overcome. Just the courage to speak about it, and then find someone that will find you a small group of people to start speaking to. Because once you start speaking it, then the people who resonate with that come to you. And that's what I found anyway.